Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to my final episode of Power Dads. I cannot believe it's the final one. And I have here with me Dr. Michael Carter, who is, he's a mental health professional, but he is also a pastor, father of seven kids, seven
Yeah,
children.
yeah.
Very busy. I don't know how he has time on a Saturday afternoon to even be here, but I'm really grateful to have him. It's actually my first time kind of meeting him. Um, you know, like in
Virtually.
person, virtually. But I'm gonna let Dr. Mike introduce himself a bit, and then we'll get into the questions that I have for him.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you today. Thank you for inviting me. I always find it as a something I love doing, but just excited to have the opportunity. I'm a father first. I tell everybody that I love being a father, probably as much as I love being a husband. Those are my two
Mhm.
favorite things. My wife's my best friend, and so together we have his, ours, and mine. Right, hers,
Mhm.
mine, and ours. And so we have a combination of things that are happening here. But it's just amazing to be with you on a Saturday, and it's my day to record, so I'm recording all day. So I'm excited. Let's hit it.
Okay. And so my first question, I guess, is kind of a softball. Is tell us a bit about how fatherhood has taught you about yourself. And that leadership wouldn't have been able to do by itself.
Absolutely. Fatherhood has taught me a lot of things, but I think chief amongst them is that I don't have to be perfect, right? Because
Mhm.
in leadership, you think that you have to be this perfect model, you're the perfect role model, the perfect teacher. I need a perfect professional. I need to look a certain way. But unfortunately, with parenting, my children get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And
Mhm.
so I try my best to be consistent in how I live. And so I've learned a lot of consistency. I've learned a lot about strengthening. I've learned a lot about just you don't have to be perfect, as I see my 10
Mhm.
year old saying hello. And you don't have to have those things in place.
Mhm.
So, the number one thing I will say that it has taught me is that I don't have to be perfect. I just have to be consistent. And so, learning consistency is key, has changed my life in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like growing up, I always heard the adults saying, you have to be consistent with your kids, because if you're not, like, it just doesn't really work. Like, you can't have different rules every day, kind of like
Right.
switching up the strategy, um, unless you absolutely must. But there has to be this kind of partnership, between the parents where it's like everyone's on the same page, or it doesn't really work. And I think it works like that as well for leadership too. Like that same consistency that you're doing, in your home, like that goes into like your work life, where as you're leading others, being consistent in how you approach, the people that you lead, I think is also very important as well.
Yeah. I would
You
say
know.
this to your point, though. You have to be just. So in
Mhm.
everything you do, there has to be just because I have so many children, especially
Mhm.
boys. So I have five boys who live in the house with us, right? Or
Mhm.
who lived in the house. Some of them are grown now. The rules do change. So you're an attorney, you'll get this. The
Yeah.
rules do change, right? So
Mhm.
how I rule with the 18-year-old is not how I rule with the 10-year-old. And
Exactly.
so sometimes they don't understand that. But I think when you have that opportunity to really explain and share that your heart is your heart and you're just and you're fair, even in
Mhm.
your leadership, those on my team feel the same way, right?
Yeah.
He's just toward me.
Mhm.
So, right, I don't judge a person on their worst day. I
Yeah.
judge them based upon their consistency as well.
No, I think that's really important. And just to kind of clarify what I was saying is like that it has to be fair. Like that's
Yes.
kind of where I was going with that, where it's like you can't have different rules for different people.
Right.
There has to be some kind of standard even with justness, right?
Agree.
And so, me understanding as a 10-year-old when I turn 18, this shift is going to happen, I think is
Exactly.
important. But like I agree, like no, like the 5-year-old doesn't get the same this
Right.
the same kind of treatment,
Of
or
course.
even
Yeah.
expectations as the 10-year-old versus the 18-year-old, and so on and so forth. No, I think definitely there has to be adjustments. And you know speaking of adjustments, like you've like been on the pulpit, you've been in boardrooms, you've also like been just somebody giving advice in a barbershop, right? And so
Right.
how do you define spiritual leadership in the context of being a Black father in America today? And I know that's a really loaded question. um,
Yeah, that's super loaded, right?
so I think parse it in it. I'll give you time for that one because I feel like you can parse it in quite a few ways. And I would really love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, it's amazing. So first, let me say this: as an African American male in America, I have to have the talk,
Hmm.
right, with my sons, but not just with my sons. I find myself having to have that same talk with young men across our community. I've
Hmm.
been a basketball coach. I've been a football coach. I've been a coach in high school, middle school, elementary school, and semi pro, right?
Hmm.
So I've coached on a lot of levels. There's a lot of people who call me dad. There's
Hmm.
people who call me dad who are 5 years younger than me.
Oh
There's people
wow.
who call me dad who's 5 years older than me.
Hmm.
All right. And so me saying that um, begins to paint a picture of if you lead with faith, faith is my guiding principle,
Hmm.
right? I don't care what your faith is. I do, but I don't.
Yeah.
Faith is my guiding principle. So, because faith is my guiding principle, I'm always going to lead from a place of faith,
Hmm.
from a place of hope, and first person wording, right? So, I use
Yeah.
first person language a lot
Hmm.
because of my faith, and then because I work in trauma informed care, and
Right.
so because of those two things, I bring that into the spirituality realm, but I bring that into the leadership space and say, hey, if we're at the barbershop and we're having a conversation, I'm going to always empower that brother, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I'm gonna tell him he's wrong. Here's something I say in my groups all the time: if you don't have a person who can tell you you stink, you don't have a friend,
Yeah.
because somebody in your life has to say it's time to shower.
Hmm.
Somebody in your life has got to say, bro, we can't leave like that, right? You got
Yeah.
to go
Yeah.
back, change your clothes. You look tack, bro. You're not going with me. You cannot get with me in my car smelling
Hmm.
like that, right?
Hmm.
And we joke about it, but I'm so serious. You have
Yeah.
to have a person in your life who can do that. And so when you give someone that vulnerability and when you give me that space in your life, then what you're really saying is I can love on you, I can strengthen you, I can build with you, so I can check you when you
Right.
talk to your girl wrong.
Mm.
I can say, you should have said that to your son. And if
Yeah.
I can have those type of intimate spaces with you, then I know that we can really talk about some very strong things in our community, and we can lead from a place of growth, not pain, not
Mm.
trauma, and not being pulled down and torn down as many people try to do to us.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. No, I think it's so funny that you say that because we we often expect that it's only going to be people that are younger than us that are,
Yeah.
or usually like much younger that are looking up to us. But sometimes, like you really wisely pointed out, like there are people that are close in age, maybe even the same age, older than you, that are also looking to you for guidance in these different roles that you've played. And so, you know my question to you is, just based on what you said about having somebody that, you can trust to kind of tell you, like, quote unquote, when you stink, right? Like,
Right.
or even when you're doing well, I think
Right.
too is really important, right? Like somebody that, when they speak to you about yourself, it's coming from a place of like, I know who you are, and I'm giving you information based on who you are, not based on who I am or based on
Right.
my own fears. And so, kind of like looking at this person in wholeness. And so I wonder how that plays into the work that you're doing in mental health and community healing. How are you creating space for emotional wellness for the people that you work with, but also like the people like within your household as well?
Yeah, that took me a long time to learn, right?
Hmm.
That was one of those balancing things that I had to learn over time, that I couldn't be a place where the whole world saw this perfect figure,
Mhm.
right? Where I saved the world but lost my house,
Right.
right? I couldn't be a superhero outside my home and come home and be like the loser of the house. And so
Mm.
what I had to learn was this. I needed safe space. I needed a place to be vulnerable. I needed a place to be broken. I needed a place to cry.
Mm.
And by building myself that space, and by building a place where I was able to have solace at home, by default, creates a space that's duplicable for my children. And
Mhm.
so my
Mhm.
entire house has it. Now you have to understand my house. My house is a tension house. I have a bunch of mini me's running around. I told you there was 5 boys in the house. So my wife has to deal with me times that number, right? And so you get the sarcasm because I'm very sarcastic. You get the
Mm.
quick wit. You get the tension of is that direction, is that clarity, is that him being funny.
Mhm.
You know what it does? It creates space for conversation.
Right.
And so we have learned how to have conversation. We have learned how to heal. We have learned that sometimes sacred silence is the holiest and most fulfilling thing you can have. And I know in a secular space, that's like, what do you mean? But being able to create space or a room for someone to be quiet and not have to divulge everything right away, and to feel okay crying but not talking, to not feel like they have to explain what the bad day was, but know you're going to let them vent. And as a man, hear me, not have to give the solution is hard.
Mm.
Okay. So that was the part as dad. I want to fix it. As husband, I want to fix it. But most of the guys on here will be able to tell you that once you learn to give space and place without having to have answers, is not only freeing for them, it's freeing for you, because
Mhm.
now I don't have to be the superhero for them either.
Right.
I can just be dad. I can say, you know what, bro, I don't know. We can learn together. And so we lost my daughter
Mm.
3 years ago now, 4 years ago, 4 years ago. This year will be 4 years. Tragically,
Mm.
still felt like yesterday. And I had to go through that. It was a DV issue. And so
Mm.
how do you create space in trauma when
Mm.
you want to fix it and you can't? And
Right.
then how do you come back and still create space for those who are left after a tragic event?
Mm.
So I've had to learn firsthand, and
Yeah.
I've had to grow with it, and then I've now used it to help others. I don't wear it as a badge or feel sorry for me. I now say, hey, let me help you, because there's so many people who
Mhm.
have this same problem who need to know that, hey, someone loves you, someone's been there, and let me teach you how to create that space. Sorry for the long answer, but that is really what it is.
No, I love long answers. I kind of want you to like talk more. It's funny because I'll admit I wanted to ask you about, your daughter passing
Yeah,
away,
ask me
but
whatever.
I wasn't sure. I was like, oh, that's kind of pryy, but
Nah,
I'm sure that like there are listeners who have, experienced just the loss of a child. I think is,
yeah,
like I remember as a kid, my aunt passed away, and she was like 43, and
okay,
so I got to see my grandmother experiencing
yeah,
that, and she was a pastor as well, and so it was
okay,
like one of those things where I just remember how she never cried publicly, but I
right,
remembered those moments, because she was expected to kind of be, the glue in
right,
the family, right? So the glue can't fall apart,
right,
but at the same time, like her creating that space for herself in the house to be able to do that. And so like, how I don't know, like how does one create space for others to grieve while you're grieving, your own
yeah,
loss, and also thinking about all the things you could have or should have, and because I
yeah,
feel like we go through that, right? And so how
yeah.
like how have you managed that in your own life, and how are you helping the people you work with, heal through their processing as well?
Yeah, so the tough part is I failed at it at first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I had a friend, shout out to my boy Aubrey, who's, if not on here, probably will watch later. Aubrey
Mhm.
is amazing, high level individual that most people would know if I said his whole name. But he said to me when it first happened, like, bro, either you're Superman or it hasn't hit you yet.
Mm.
And I said, why can't I be both? I am
Mhm.
him, right?
Mhm.
And we
Mhm.
laughed and we joked about it. And the year went through, the first year, and I went through all the motions, went through all the firsts, right?
Mhm.
And so she dies, just so you know, put it in kind of in retrospect, she dies 4 days after Thanksgiving,
Oh, wow.
but it's a few days before her birthday, and we're
Mm.
going to have the funeral essentially on her birthday.
Oh, wow.
And so, and which then of course lets you know where Christmas is, and my birthday's
Mhm.
next month, right?
Mm.
And so this is just a bad time. So I get through that first year, but then I get to the next year and I'm watching the national championship game for college football.
Mm.
We're coming out of COVID lockdowns, and I'm watching this game. My birthday's in a couple of weeks, and I can't watch the game. I just don't feel right.
Mm.
And I go to sleep, and I remember having a nightmare. I wake up in the middle of the night, and my life drastically changes.
Mm.
Everything falls apart. I'm beginning to have an emotional breakdown. I don't know that is grief. I
Mm.
don't know what's happening to me. I am in a place of sunkenness, brokenness, despair, defeat, and now no one knows what's wrong with me.
Mm.
I'm going through heart problems. I'm going through medical conditions. I'm going through things that have never happened to me. From that
Mm.
point to this point, I probably gained 60 pounds. I think the last thing we saw, right?
Mm.
Between medications and changes and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But more to your point, I had to break first.
Mhm.
I went through a year of brokenness, and I got to a place where I didn't care what other people thought, what other people felt, and what other people did. And it
Mhm.
was not until I got to that place that I could begin to heal.
Yeah.
But here was the problem. At that same time that all of that happened, there was a lot of good happening at that same
Right.
time. So we were buying houses, buying cars, starting new positions, taking promotions, starting new projects,
Mm.
launching things. And all of that converged into a place where anxiety just wiped me out. So
Yeah.
I learned a couple of lessons. And one of the lessons that I learned was journaling is your best friend. Okay. So write everything. I use now a technique called mindless journaling.
Mm.
15 minutes before I go to sleep, I write random stuff. But
Mm.
what we don't realize, if I can nerd out for a second, is when you go to sleep, your mind begins to erase itself and cleanse itself, and
Mm.
it gets rid of pictures. That's why the cat has a blue sock on, right?
Mhm.
And so when you do mindless journaling, the cat no longer has the blue sock on
Mm.
because the blue sock is pulled out because you cleansed it yourself.
Right,
So
right.
as you do the mindless journaling, you start to cleanse those erratic thoughts that are just in there
Mhm.
so that your
Mhm.
sleep becomes more peaceful. The second thing I learned was sleep hygiene. Like
Mm.
sleep hygiene. Yeah, I showered every night. So I didn't understand this whole thing about sleep hygiene. Okay. But I learned how to use aromatherapy. I learned how to open a window. I learned how to understand weather patterns and
Right.
if the window should be open or not because of rain. I learned all of these things that factor into how you sleep, and I began to improve that. And so
Mhm.
my sleep process was better, and I could get less sleep, but more efficient sleep, which made me feel better. So those were things like little tweaks. So the things that I was saying, wrapping that up, is number
Right.
one, when you're grieving, you have to learn that you're grieving. You have to accept that you're grieving.
Mhm.
You have to worry about you first, put your own gas mask on, and then give space to everybody to do the same thing you're doing because we all grieve differently. And
Mhm.
if you respect that, then healing comes and everybody in the house has equal access to healing.
Yeah. No, that's so I'm so glad that you broke it down in that way. I actually have a pattern with my own grief. I actually broke the pattern a few years ago where I don't grieve things right away.
Yeah.
I tend to like put it away for, like, and it's not like a specific timing. It's like my brain will just decide, oh, we can't deal with this right now because you have to
Right.
do, and then it'll like outline the list of things that need to happen before I deal with the thing.
Right.
Um, and I broke that pattern in 2023 when I lost one of my cousins, who was like, we grew up with the same grandmother. And he was a couple years younger than me. So it really kind of hit me hard, just based on the conversations we had. And I remembered like my initial response was, oh, you can't deal with this right now. Like you have way too much work. I was at a big law firm at the time still, and like stupid busy.
Right.
Like they already told me I couldn't have extra time off. And now I'm
Right.
like, what? And it actually happened it was like 2 days before I was supposed to go back from
Okay.
vacation that it happened. And I remember just kind of going to sleep, waking up and kind of having this similar moment you're having, but it was almost like my brain was like, oh wait, no, we actually can't put this off. Like
Right.
we have to, like, there are too many things in queue that have been put off.
Right.
So we can't put this one off. And like, this is actually like, this needs to be bumped to the top of the list kind of thing.
Right.
And I remember like, it was the first time I ever took bereavement time off
Wow.
in like my entire working life. So like, could you imagine like 20 years of working and never taking bereavement time? It's crazy.
Yeah, I can.
And again, like this like need to be strong, like I think it's something that happens a lot in the Black community as well, where it's like there's always that person who's supposed to be the rock, but like
Right.
but at the same time everyone thinks they're the person that's supposed to be the rock.
Right. Right.
Sometimes.
But let me ask you this question though. So I talk about this in some paper I did some time back.
Mhm.
Who taught you how to grieve as an African American? Think about when you were a child.
Mhm.
How did you learn how to grieve? Because
Well,
that picture of grief is very weird.
mhm. And it's funny because I saw different examples and
Exactly.
I didn't like the falling apart examples.
Exactly.
And I remember I had one aunt who was like in between. And so I always told myself I was going to be like her. And this was like, and I think she'd never admit it, but I think her way is similar to what I would do, kind of like, okay, we're going to do all of these logistics right now. And then when it calms down, we can like process
Right.
everything. And I think like I have one other moment in my life where my aunt passed away. Like she was like I always say she was like a second mom to me, which I
Okay.
don't know if my mom appreciates that. um but like she was just like, it's like if my mom was like the right arm of my coach, she was the left arm. Like that's how it
Right.
felt, especially in like my 20s. Like I feel like she really stepped in, and was kind
Right.
of like my mom away from home, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so like when she passed away, like I remember I had to handle all of the, like I was, because that was my mom's younger sister.
Right.
And so now I was like, oh, my mom, I was like, mom can't handle this. Like, she's trying to be strong, but I know she's gonna like lose it. Like,
Right.
And so like I took on that role. And then I remembered we had to like fly her overseas. And I remember like I made sure everybody got their flights and everything. And then when I went to go get my flight, the flight was canceled.
Oh wow.
And they couldn't, and it was so crazy. Like they didn't tell us that it was canceled until like all of the other options to get there before her going home ceremony would happen. And so I ended up missing the funeral.
Wow.
And yeah, and so it was like, and I remember like my family was like, no, like you're fine, but that was really hard for me. So I always felt like I never really got to say goodbye to her.
No closure.
And I actually, that was 2018. I didn't actually process her until 2 years after she had died.
Wow.
And I remember it like it was yesterday, because the thing that got me out of it was, wait, like you loved each other. I had all of these videos and photos of us like just in my phone, I have data from my aunt's life, like 10 years living in America, that
Wow.
nobody else has, kind of thing. And so I was like, wow, and so like that helped me, because I was like, no, like she actually lived a really good life, because she lived in a way where it was very like she'd been very sacrificial in her youth, and then she woke up
Right.
one day and was like, no, I want to live fully. And like I saw her kind of like reinvent herself, in a
Right.
way. And so like to me, like it just it goes back to what you said, right? Everybody grieves differently, right? And
Yeah.
that's why sometimes we can't be judging from the outside. It's like sometimes even if somebody says they're okay, you should still check for them in the way
Absolutely.
in the way that,
Absolutely.
because you just never know. And so how did you I guess, how did you undergird your family in the first year,
Yeah.
so that they, like, how were they able then to kind of like reciprocate what you needed? Because I mean, think about it, like when we lose people, like people are there what, the first month.
Yeah. They've
But
if
if,
that.
right,
Right.
like if if you're blessed to have people that
Right.
will hang out, right? But
Right.
a year later, people aren't necessarily there. And so how did your family like kind of come in and support you during that time period when, like you said, like things are going haywire.
Yeah.
It's like all the good stuff, but all the, but now you're like, wait, my body's falling apart, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
you
And I'm
know
glad you said that. So number one thing that happened for me was in the first year, I took my kids and my wife and everybody to counseling.
Mhm.
And we did family counseling, and I set them up all with individual counseling. And they're like, yo, why are we going to counseling? And then later in
Mhm.
the year, they'd be like, they'll see the counselor somewhere. They're like, that's our counselor, right?
Right,
That's
right,
our family
right.
counselor. It was like really cool because this person is
Mhm.
now a part of this family. And so even now when they see them, there's just this meshing with that person.
Right.
And so they were able to be strengthened. And I
Mm.
thought I was doing all the right things for me. But because I strengthened them then,
Mm.
a year later, when I began to have issues, they strengthened me. So my oldest
Mm.
son gave me a book to read, The Body Keeps Score, right? And
One of my
that
favorite
wasn't
books.
exactly right. And so I hadn't been exposed to that work until that moment.
Mhm.
Like, why am I going through some of these things that I'm going through? Now, mind you, at the same time, I'm going through some physical stuff they can't figure out. I have to have a colonoscopy. They find precancer. So the one side was,
Mm.
okay, if this doesn't happen to me, I'm probably not sitting here today, right?
Mm.
Colon. But because it did happen to me, God used those moments. I'm always going to lead by faith. All right.
Yeah,
God
yeah.
used that moment to get me to a place of healing. So now they got to
Mhm.
support me through that because now my mind's in a whole different place. So
Yeah.
when I'm talking about stuff piling on, but I have an amazing wife who supports me. She is extremely super smart, knowledgeable, got her own doctorate degree. So she was able to close some gaps. She was
Mm.
able to step in. And then all of my children in a different way were able to lift for me. And so you see our
Mm.
business, you see us starting the first part of our team are those
Mm.
boys, right? You know,
Right.
4 of them are grown now,
Mhm.
and 2
Mhm.
are in college. So they're starting to take things over. They were able to undergird me, drive me, make sure I got to appointments,
Mm.
talk to me, lecture me. In some ways, they parent me. I got one around here now calls me son. All right, he's the father he thinks, and I'm like, dude, I'm not that old, but he swears he's my father.
Mhm.
But they were able to do those things, but it was
Mhm.
out of that a lot of creativity for us started to happen, and we
Mm.
found ways to do things together. Now, watch this. So my daughter dies overnight. She's shot and killed leaving work, and unfortunately, this thing plays out on TV. Okay, so this becomes
Mm.
national news, local news. So I always say to people, it's one thing when you have a death and you're fighting grief privately.
Right.
There's another thing when it's open
Mhm.
and you've got politicians and news channels everywhere, and
Right.
you can't turn on something without seeing it. And so
Mhm.
now people from 30, 20 years ago are following up with you late
Right,
because they
right,
start to
right.
put the pieces together that that's your
Mhm.
child. So this grieving process stretched a long time
Yeah.
because of the tragic nature of it
Mm.
happening. The first one of the first uh cameras catching it live that they had
Oh,
put in. So you're
wow.
talking about traffic cameras, things of
Oh
that
my
nature.
god. Wow.
And to see your child in a car being
Hmm.
shot is something that most parents don't want to experience. And
Yeah.
so they had to help me reframe it. They had to help me remove. And then I'll share this, not for sympathy, but I need you to hear me. The assailant, so the boy kills my daughter, and then he sends me a long inbox about what he did
Oh, wow.
and what he was going to do next, which included me and my
Mm.
grandson. And so I had to wrestle with that, and I had to wrestle with my ability. Now he got killed by the police later because he shot them too,
Right.
shot at them too. But I said all of that to say you have to be willing to lean on your community. That
Yeah.
happens in the morning. My son plays a basketball game that night. He was a freshman in
Mm.
high school, really strong on the basketball team, and he still played in
Mm.
honor of his sister. And it taught me that we all grieve differently and we have to respect different strength
Mhm.
levels
Yeah.
because he handled that game, but he didn't handle the next day as well, which is the
Mhm.
same with me. I handled moments.
Yeah, like you handled that year,
Yeah,
like you were Mr. This is we are organized in our mental health. We're doing
right,
what we need to do, and but like at the same time, like never really having your moment to
right.
to really process what had happened.
Or
Um
thinking I did,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I processed it the same way I processed all the other loss. I lost my
Mhm.
grandmother a few months before her, right? It was COVID. We were losing
Mhm.
everybody,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so to have all of that and to be locked in the house. So I couldn't go
Mm.
outside. I
Oh my
couldn't
word.
overwork, right? I couldn't do the things we would do. We couldn't bury people the way we normally could.
Mhm.
Grief was at an all-time high.
Yeah.
And so I tell people COVID taught me a lot too, because it taught me that grief isn't space and time.
Mm.
Okay. We think it happened today. You're going to grieve today. No, let me tell you something. If you lose a child, your life will never be the same,
Mhm.
especially if they're younger.
Yeah.
And so, as a parent, you will never be the same. And you have to come to grips with that. And I mean that with all sincerity. Any parent on
Mhm.
here will tell you your life changes.
Yeah.
And the way you approach things changes. But you know what? It caused me to spend more time on my children. It caused me to be more engaged, more active than I already was.
Hmm.
It increased my fathering
Yeah.
because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss moments.
Hmm. No, that's so important. And let me tell you, that grief not having time and space, like there's still days where like my grandmother passed away back in 2001.
Yeah.
I took an AP exam and then I went to, to the funeral, like, so like kind of having those same sensations that like your son who played the basketball game had,
Right.
like, like I'm gonna do it because like she would expect me to do it kind of
Right.
thing, but like to this day, and it's been
Yeah.
24 years, like to this day, like there are just moments that you have where you wish the person could be there to
Yeah.
see the thing that, like sometimes they're the only person that could understand the joke that,
Right.
that
Exactly.
that
Mhm.
or like that you had that memory with, that's
Right.
now being triggered by, oh, do you remember when, oh wait, no, that wasn't
Mhm.
you,
Right.
and so yeah, and so no, I think that's really important to say, and it's so important for the work that you do, right? Because you do a
Right.
lot of trauma informed,
Right.
mental health counseling, and that's some of the work that I do with leaders, where I focus in on like, okay, how do you wrangle your own traumatic experiences,
Yeah.
and process them so that you can truly get the healing that you need, so that
Right.
that doesn't start leaking into the other areas of your life, right? Whether it's your
Right.
physical health, and I'm so glad you touched on that, because ultimately, the things we hold in end up making us sick,
Right.
I think, like, I developed a weird, like, stomach issue during
Mm.
COVID because of just from the stress that I never displayed. Because when people look at me, they're
Wow.
like, "Oh, you don't get anxious, you don't," and it's like my heart never races. Like, even my doctor's like, "Dude, why is your resting heart rate like 80 over 60? Like, that's not
Right.
okay." you know but for me, I don't know, I think I always tell people, like, I think that's just a gift from God. Like,
Right.
even like when you talked about just learning how to sleep better and having more efficient sleep, like, i've
Right.
i've been really blessed to be able to have some of that without even being intentional about it, where I'll, like, once my head hits the pillow, it's like the day's over, I'm asleep.
Right.
And and then I'm up at like 4 a.m. and I'm like, Lord, especially in the winter, I'm like, Lord, it's dark outside. Why are
Right.
we awake right now? Like nobody else is awake, or I don't need. It's Saturday. I don't need to be awake yet. And so, like, what I love about what we've been talking about so far is just how everything along the way has shaped, even, kind of like your everyday experience, as well as like these like long visionary, ideas about like how you want to live your life, how you want to be intentional about the things that you're doing with your family, within your business. And I
Right.
think that's so important, where it's like you've taken the time to reflect. I also love the mindless journaling thing that you said
Yeah.
as well. um, how did you come up with that?
Yeah, that was a matter of just researching in God's intuitive ability to tell me what I needed, right?
Mhm.
And then I started doing it with just different clients, and it worked. So
Yeah.
once I did the research, Carolyn Leaf, Carolyn Leaf has a book. It's a blue
Mhm.
book that's on this shelf somewhere. She has a book that talks about rewriting the schisms of your brain. So Aubrey, you got to
Mm.
understand, I'm a nerd, okay? I'm a bona fide nerd.
Mhm.
Um, she talks about rewriting the schemas on your brain. And because I'm a psych guy, I
Mhm.
started just doing researches on schema and how do we rewrite it.
Right,
Well, it
right.
takes experiences, and one of the quickest ways to accelerate in anything is to write it. Most
Mm.
people don't realize that. And I don't mean type it, I mean you
Yeah,
have
like
to
actually
write it.
writing it out. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
pen to pad. And once I figured that out, and once I understood what mind dumping does, and I understood what dreaming really was, I was able to pull all of that together.
Mm.
Like I said, through prayer and just hearing God. And honest to goodness, it worked. It is
Mhm.
amazing. So anyone who does it for 21 days always comes back to me and say, "This was the game changer for me."
Mhm.
Because you're not. Let me be clear. You're not writing like you normally journal. You are literally setting a timer and writing for 15 minutes, whatever comes to your
Mm.
mind. This is not going to be your next best seller. This is not
Right.
going to be your next blog or your next LinkedIn post. This is going to be trash eventually. It's going to be funny. It's going to be lighthearted. Sometimes it's going to be sad.
Mhm.
Sometimes you're going to write things out of anger, but all of your emotions come through, and it's just freeing. You will
Yeah.
free yourself. Your dreams will change. I don't remember my dreams. You might once your mind is decluttered. A
Mhm.
person who don't
Mhm.
remember their dreams is usually a person with too much on their mind,
Mm.
right? And so
Yeah.
once you begin to slow down, and once you begin to get into deep sleep and REM sleep, and you can check it with your watch and different apps, but once you're
Mhm.
able to position yourself for more of that, it becomes more restorative, and it's just so much better. I'm telling you, it's a game changer. Not in the morning, not in the afternoon. It really needs to be 15 minutes before you go to sleep.
Yeah. No, I'm actually gonna try it.
Yeah, do
It's
it.
funny, I used to journal a lot when I was a kid. And I used to have these like really elaborate dreams as
Yeah.
a child. And I still do have like pretty psychedelic dreams
Yeah, yeah.
without, without the drugs.
Right.
But what's but what I find really interesting is going back to what you said about remembering your dreams is I don't really dream while I'm asleep, but
Got
I
you.
have like dream vision. So
Yep.
like I will be wide awake and then it was like I just kind of displace and I go in a
Yeah.
completely different realm or
Is that in
dimension.
color? Can you see
Yeah.
in color? Okay,
Yeah.
great. So your gifting is just different, right? So
Yeah.
and so let's zero in on that for a moment. Here's
Mhm.
why. Two things you've got to know. The average person doesn't dream in color, right? Most people don't
Mhm.
realize that who dream in
Yeah.
color because that's what you know. And then
Yeah.
number two, to be able to forward see or to see this vision or to see with your mind in that realm,
Mhm.
different level of gifting. However, you still have to position yourself to clear out
Yeah.
all of that internal, I call it junk,
Mhm.
gunk,
Mhm. Mhm.
so that
Mhm.
what you see is clearer,
Right.
but you will never have to worry about what your future holds
Mhm.
because you'll always be able to see it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you and I were talking on a post about 2 months ago, and that was really kind of what I was talking about.
Mhm.
I remember the conversation because someone else came in and they made a comment. I'm like, I'm not even going to entertain you because you're not on the same realm, right?
Yeah.
That when you have this ability to see it like that,
Mhm.
that's a different level of faith, right? Because
Yeah.
now it's not just I think a thing is going to happen. I tell people all the time, I know what's going to happen.
Mhm.
Like there's no shock to me because I can see it,
Right.
right?
Right.
So what I now have to go back and figure out was how do I execute what I saw?
Mhm.
That's where my faith come in because
Yeah.
it's so far beyond where I am, right?
Mhm.
It's so far beyond what I'm understanding that now I'm positioning myself. So I have a journal, right? I have a couple of them, but I have a journal. These two are essential to my life because I write those type of dreams here.
Mm.
Okay. And then behind it, there's a prayer for every one of
Mm.
those types of dreams. Some are long,
Yeah.
some are short.
Mhm.
Every one of them come to pass.
Yeah.
And so this builds my faith more than anything else in the world because
Mhm.
I can go back and I can look at these and say, I remember when. And
Yeah.
so now when people come to me and they're broken and they're hurting and they don't know how to overcome, it's here. And this is how my family helps me because they
Right.
can remind me of
The time.
these, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you remember the stories you've told your grandmother, your
Mhm.
aunt, and others, and you have those things written down,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
pieces will come. And that's how, to me, that is how we honor our new term ancestors, right?
Yeah.
And those that
Yeah.
we love. So I just wanted to throw that out there because to me, that's the game changer.
No, I completely agree. And it's funny, I was having a conversation with another believer yesterday, and they were asking me like what is God, what is God teaching me right now? And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, he's teaching me I need to be more patient.
Right.
But more patient with him.
Right.
And part of it is like he's shown me some stuff that's so out there
Right.
where I'm like, sir,
Yeah.
like you told me that was gonna happen, but look at what's happening right now.
Yeah.
What's up?
Yeah.
Like get at me, bro.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
You
with you.
know.
Right. Like
But
chop chop.
then like, but going back to what you said about bringing things into remembrance, and that's the other thing is like, I never tell people I have total recall because I have like a delayed total recall in a sense that
Understood.
if you ask me about something I have had exposure to but I didn't spend a lot of time with, I'll tell you, oh, I don't know anything about that. And as
Right.
soon as I say I don't know anything about that, my brain will create a dissertation of the thing that I
Right.
said I didn't know anything about. I'm like, oh, and then I say, oh, wait, actually. And now you're like, wait, you said you didn't know anything about that. And now you're
Right.
like telling me about sources that I should be checking. And,
Right.
like you're like citing your sources
Right.
in an informal conversation, like
Yeah.
calm down. Um, But when I was 10 years old, I told some of my friends that I was going to be an international corporate lawyer.
Okay.
And my journey to law, it took me 25 years to become a lawyer from that moment.
Wow.
Um, in the middle of the pandemic.
Right.
Like in the most ridiculous way,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
For an international law firm.
Sick.
And my first client was a country,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
And
Yeah.
like, but it's like I had to wait 20, like literally like
Yeah.
start, but I had to wait 25 years. And so it was like the Lord, it was funny. I was talking to this person yesterday and I was like, yeah, I know I need to be patient because he's always shown up for me. Like he never
Right.
just like leaves me high and dry. But like
Right.
this is the longest I've had to wait for anything, you know?
Right. Right.
um, but that's the thing about faith and being like faith led is that sometimes to build our faith, we need this kind of like ridiculous delay, right?
Yeah.
On,
Yeah.
so that we can truly, because think about it, if every time I called on the Lord, he just jumped and did whatever I wanted to, is that faith?
No. No.
you
Not
know
not at all. Right.
like is that it's just now it's just me being entitled,
Right.
like to the point where I'm like not even like, oh, you're worthy, hallowed be your name. I'm like, sir,
Right.
we was talking about this and you said XYZ. And so it keeps us, it almost like it's kind of like Isaiah says, like his ways are not our ways, right?
Lost not
His
our
thoughts are
thoughts.
not our thoughts.
Yeah.
And so it's like even in the midst, like I'm just thinking about like how you said like really amazing things were happening while like you felt like things were falling apart at the
Right.
same time.
Right.
And this is like, it's so good that we're ending with this episode. um, because it really just like shows who God is. It's like he could bless you no matter what season you're in.
No matter. And here was the killer. Okay. So full transparency. I went through some amazing things at that time. All of these things were happening. So let's rewind 4 months. Yeah, 4 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Almost everything that happened for me then happened for me again 4 months ago. Right.
Hmm.
And so these last 4 months from me and my wife have been a whirlwind, but I was
Mm.
waiting on the next shoe to drop. Right.
Right.
We bought a new house. I think I talked about that in the pulse, right? Bought a
Yeah,
new house.
yeah.
Amazing short sale deal. Amazing. Like this house is amazing. Everything we wanted, except for
Yeah.
one
You're
thing.
like, how did this happen? Thank you,
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. Everything we wanted except a soaker tub, right? My wife wanted a
Right,
soaker
right.
tub. She don't have it, but she can build it. All right. Traded our cars again. Um,
Mm.
just business stuff going crazy. Things were just exploding. And I'm like, okay, last time all of this happened, the world ended. Because
Mm.
grief hit me because this. So I was fighting, and then I remembered. Wait a minute, you're in a different place now. There's steps that
Mm-hmm.
you took. So now you got the counselor on speed dial. I got
Right,
more than one.
right.
Right? You got the therapist, you
Mm-hmm.
got the counselor, you got a doctor, you got friendships, you got strategies, you have
Yeah.
journaling, you have books, you
Mm-hmm.
have sacred space. So we went on vacations. I've never been able to take my wife.
Mm.
Let me back up. I won't say never been able to. We never took the time to go on vacation because our kids took so much time from us. We were
Yeah.
joking about this, right? Like I couldn't go on vacation. You had basketball games, you had AAU. That was my
Mm-hmm,
vacation,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
Whereas
mm-hmm.
now we were able to take a week and go away.
Like a real
Uh,
vacation where it's
a
like it's
real
not about the
vacation.
kids. Yeah,
Exactly. And
yeah.
so nope, I didn't have burnout. I had Hell's Kitchen. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm,
it was
mm-hmm.
different. And so I
Yeah,
can look back and say, thank you, God, for the experiences, because this time in the battle, I knew how to fight.
yeah.
And it reminded me of the songwriter who said, I may not fight Goliath, but I have my own battles. Right.
It's true.
And think about David, and he fought the bear, he fought the lion, he fought Goliath. And we don't
Right.
think about those little stages of
Mm-hmm.
these things help me fight that bigger giant in my
Yeah,
life. And we
yeah.
all have them. They're named
Mm-hmm.
different, right?
Exactly.
Sometimes they're a job, sometimes it's corporate
Mhm.
greed, sometimes it's a layoff, sometimes it's
Mhm.
a DEI practice gone bad. I don't care what you
Yeah.
call it.
No, it's always something. No, it's literally and I'm so it's so good that you use the reference of David though, because that was his saving grace, right? He's like,
Yeah,
oh, he's like, I bopped a lion like last week. Like
right,
this dude ain't got nothing on my God, kind of
right.
thing. And I feel like that's how I kind of handle new stuff. Like people are like,
Yeah,
oh, aren't you anxious? I'm like, no, this is like that time when, like I
right.
remember years ago I got kicked out of a church. I thought I was special, but apparently a couple of the women in my family in the generation before me have been kicked out of churches too for talking too
Okay.
much. Um and but
That is
this time
funny.
the irony is like I was actually silent. I didn't really disclose a lot of stuff about just who I was outside of the church, and so
Okay.
people made assumptions about who I was.
Got it.
And then the next thing I know, they're telling me, "Oh, you're demon possessed,
Oh,
and
wow.
you can't like come." Basically, they were like, "You can't pray in our church anymore." And
Wow.
I was like, in my head, I remember thinking, "But shouldn't you guys be trying to deliver me right
Right, right.
now?" you know, because I grew up in church, so I was
Right,
like, this is usually the time where they start throwing holy water on you and
right,
casting out the demon, right?
right.
But they were like,
That's
you
funny.
can't do the church. They're like, you can't pray anymore in the church. And it was weird because I went from doing everything in that church to being kind of strict. These things that they thought were who I was. They
Right.
were stripping away from me because they thought their church was all I had. But at the time,
Got it.
I was a professor at one of the largest like universities, like CUNY.
Right.
I was part of a nonprofit dance crew where we would dance for like charitable things.
Right.
And this was something like I was also a choreographer for that church as well at the time. So they thought that was who I was. And
Got it.
so ultimately I got like pushed out of the church. And it was like they accused me of pride. How do
Got it.
you like ultimately to get me out? It was like as they stripped me, you're prideful.
Got
And I
it.
remember asking them when like to give me an example of what they meant. And in my head kind of being thinking, oh, now they're gonna really think I'm prideful because I asked for an
Right.
example, and they
Right.
just take their word as bond. But fast forward to a few years ago, I'm up against a bigger issue in my life, and now I'm
Yeah.
being accused again for something else that like it's like how do I defend myself from this accusation. And I remember sitting in the room with these people thinking, oh, this is like when that church kicked you out.
Right.
And what happened after that church kicked me out was because I was looking at full time ministry, but the Lord didn't
Okay.
want that for me. He
Understood.
wanted me in the marketplace. And so what
Right.
was funny is like I tried becoming a youth pastor at another church, and that
Right.
pastor was like, no, like I'm seeing God wants you in the marketplace. A
Right.
year after he told me that, I was in law school.
Okay.
2 years after that, I was at a big law firm, right?
Right.
And so like, and what also happened was my salary like increase like x like 10x, like how
Right.
you have these
Yeah.
10x coaches, like
Yeah.
that was my 10x coach.
Right.
If you will.
Yeah.
And so I remember sitting in that like tragic meeting a few years ago and thinking, God, what are you gonna give me for this? Because they taking a lot away right now.
Right.
you know but
Yeah.
like that's kind of where my mind went, because like I recognize the patterns,
Right.
because God has a very, it's like, although he can surprise us, you can still see the pattern in his surprises, right?
Exactly.
And it's
Yep.
often in obedience, right? It's often
Yep.
in like, have you followed his precepts? Have you really believed and pressed into him? Have you really
Right.
made him the Lord of your life, right? And
Yep.
so, my final question for you is, what kind of advice would you give to fathers who are, you know, whether or not they live with their children, because we know that that's not always the case, but
Right.
how can they build, the right kind of legacy for their children, so that they can feel established, and have a good example of a father on earth, kind of like as we've been talking about our heavenly father being good to us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's part of the conversation I was having even earlier today with one of my children and my wife. So having 7 kids, I was blessed. 6 lived
Mm-hmm.
with me, 1 didn't.
Mm,
And that one child perspective of me is vastly different than the other
mm,
6.
right.
Not negative,
Just
but
different.
different,
Yeah.
because not only did they not live with me, they don't live close to me.
Mm,
So there's a state difference, there's a travel
right.
difference. So
Right.
I can't be at the basketball game,
Mm-hmm.
but they can watch me post all of
About
their
what you're
brothers'
doing.
basketball games and
Right.
football games and then say, but my dad's not at mine. So
Mm,
how did I be able to bridge that gap and create legacy? Right.
mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I found out was that kid for a birthday wanted a iPad one time
Mm-hmm.
and a pencil because they wanted to draw dresses.
Right.
And I was like, oh, let me tell you what happened with dad. Dad can draw a lick, but I was into
Mm,
fashion. And
right.
one day I decided to go to YouTube and learn. And let me show you my KKK hoodie that I drew, because this
Oh,
hoodie looked like it was straight from the KKK.
oh wow.
Uh, but then I walked in the closet and said, but here's yours. And she was like,
Mm,
what? And I'm like, here's your hoodie. This hoodie I made with you in mind.
mm.
This hoodie was for you. And when I first started making clothes, everything that I made was after one of those kids.
Oh wow.
And she began to realize, wait, we're doing fashion
Mm,
and I can be a part. Like, yeah, there's space for you
yeah.
in this. And you don't have to live with us to be a part. Send us designs,
Mm-hmm.
send us this, send us that. And I was able to engulf her in. So the point that I want to make to fathers is you've got to do the work
Yeah.
to bridge the gap and
Mm-hmm.
then bring them into what you're building. And I was able to do that with that one child to bring her into that lane. Each one of my children have a lane in our business. So if you
Mm,
watch most of the videos that you see from me, my 10-year-old's editing because he's the
mm.
best editor that I know. He
That's
knows every
awesome.
software,
Yeah.
how it works from CapCut to Adobe Express to whatever. He's monitoring my side of this chat and commenting on yours at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
he's multifaceted, but they all have their lane. And so
Yeah.
I am simply trying to leave a name that my children would be proud of,
Mm-hmm.
that when they hear people say, I remember Dr. Mike, they'll be like, yeah, that was my dad.
Yeah.
And did you know my dad? And they'll be able to walk into those arenas when my
Mm-hmm.
children are, I sent his kids World Harvest. And when he was there, people will walk in and call him nephew because they knew
Mm,
his dad. He was at
mm.
the world's largest church at one time.
Oh
And people
wow.
are saying, hey, nephew. And they're looking at him like,
Mm,
well, who's your dad? Right? That
right.
everybody knows you. That's
Mm-hmm.
the type of
Mm-hmm.
legacy I'm looking to live. Ari, I tell people all the time, to be him doesn't mean that everyone needs to know me,
Right.
but it means that your favorite people need to know me. So
Right.
I
Right.
always joke with my kids. We're in the car, and I say this jokingly, but I do mean it. I'm like, I'm your favorite preacher's favorite preacher.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
your
Mm-hmm.
favorite, right? Like, I want to be
Yeah.
that. I want to
Yeah.
be that person that people turn to so that
Mm-hmm.
when the books are all done and written, my kids aren't like, he didn't live that. I am the
Right.
same person no matter where you see me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to crack the corny joke on stage. I'm going to crack the corny joke at Longhorn. I'm going to crack
Mm-hmm.
it in the car, right? I'm going to
Yeah.
crack it on you no matter what. And everybody can get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
that's just who I am. And that's how you build legacy, being consistent, being just, having faith, staying committed, learning what works for you, making space for others, and at the end of the day, admitting that you need a little more patience. Don't judge me on my worst day, and don't judge
Mm.
me on my best day, because neither one of those is who I really am.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much to everyone who tuned in today. Dr. Mike was so good, wasn't he? I mean, I feel so full. I'm probably gonna have to watch this the next couple of weeks so I can get all the notes. But the thing that stuck out the most to me was the preparation that one
Right,
has to make. Even when you don't know why you're making the preparation, and recognizing it after the fact, because sometimes we don't recognize how we've prepared, right? And so,
right,
a good way for us to, just curb anxiety or curb depression is remembering, oh, wait, no, I prepared for this. I
right,
did the work, and so to echo Dr. Mike, do the work, be consistent, have faith, and recognize that, like, and give yourself grace. I think that's
right,
so important, remembering, like, you are not your worst or your best day, so
right.
give yourself grace. All right, thank you so much, guys.